It's a weird future, but it is something that I think we'll experience.
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, the home of campaign tech innovation on the right. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, you're joining in on a conversation with entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. Our guest today is Robert Moran. He's a futurist, a management consultant, and a pollster. He began his career in political consulting and polling. He recently wrote a fascinating article at Campaigns and Elections about a thought experiment where an AI runs for office. In our conversation, we dive deeper into his vision of an AI politician, what it would mean for our politics, and some more near-term impacts of artificial intelligence in campaigns. All right, Robert, some people might be listening and say we've got enough artificial intelligence in politics today. Why would we want an AI to be a candidate and run for office?
It's a great question. And I think the important thing to think through first before we even address it is that this technology is racing ahead. And so what we think of AI today will be very different in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. And so, today we're mostly thinking about things like ChatGPT or what are called large language models. But at some point, we're going to have what's called artificial general intelligence, which means AI that actually does think for itself, not just a large language model that's essentially garbage in, garbage out, that sounds like a person but isn't actually thinking, right? So if you think out in time, then things start to get very interesting, which is why I wrote Lincoln 2.0 in the article that you referenced. So if you assume that we get an artificial general intelligence at some point here, 5, 10 years down the road, things start to get fascinating. So, for example, for your listeners, these are just facts that they're going to experience in a few years. So, they're going to have an AI assistant. AI is going to be embedded in most of the software packages they use. They're going to use AIs to negotiate rates on goods and services. And AI may be a therapist for them and will be a coworker. And they will be much more comfortable interacting with artificial intelligence in the next couple of years than they are today. Now, all that is to say that this technology is racing ahead. Then the question is, would we ever want this? And I think that's a very open question, and it's why I wrote the book. So I don't think people will ever want to elect some sort of generic super intelligence because that feels too much like
HAL 9000 or something like that.
Right, exactly. Yes. But in my thought experiment, if you base it on a historical figure that people know and understand and also can roughly predict their behavior and worldview, that becomes a very different matter. And I think that is what you're going to see when someone does it. And so I just chose Abraham Lincoln because he's one of the publicly available polling says that he's one of the most famous and well-known presidents and well-respected presidents. So I decided to use him as the model for this thought experiment.
So you raise a really good point here that you go back and look at people writing contemporaneously with the invention of TV, radio, telephones, and they sound so skeptical of no one would ever want to walk around with a phone in their pocket. And right. Here we are in 2023 where it's, people go through withdrawals if they don't have access to their phones. And so it's important to predicate this conversation, as you point out, that there's going to be familiarity with it. And anytime there's new technology, there's a little bit of an adoption curve that, you think about the people who resisted email for a very long time, the people who resisted texting, social media, and now it is just table stakes for business, for campaigns, for politics. When it comes to training a candidate AI, what are we putting in? How would you train it? Obviously, for folks who might not know, artificial intelligence gets trained on a corpus of data. So someone like Abraham Lincoln, how would you train that?
So this is where it gets really fun. And I'm going to talk about a couple spin-offs that people are going to see in the next couple years. So if you're going to train an AI candidate, one of the reasons why some of our most well-known candidates, why some of our most well-known politicians are great candidates for doing this, is because we have so much information on them. So, for example, with Abraham Lincoln, we have all of his speeches. We even have telegrams, telegraph messages that he sent to Grant. Lincoln was a very big letter writer, and we have many of those letters. And so because he had a very long political career, because he wrote his own speeches, and because he was a constant letter writer, we have an enormous body of text attributed to him. Not only that, but we have a very large number of biographies and contemporaneous accounts of the man. So that makes him a fantastic candidate. Now, a fantastic candidate for being having a trained candidate in this position. So there are other historical figures that could be exceptionally good choices for this. Winston Churchill, because he had such a long career and wrote so many of his own speeches and wrote a number of books. We also have very detailed accounts of sort of interactions with him and a number of biographies. So I think that what will happen is some future team with funding will look at this and they will choose individuals that have a very long track record of communication and a lot of biographies about them. And so that's where Lincoln comes racing to mind. But MLK would be another great example where you have a lot of information. Now, the next challenge when we have AGI essentially reincarnate or bring back this politician. The problem is that it's Rip Van Winkle. They're dropped into a future they could barely understand.
Right. We don't know what Abraham Lincoln thought about highways or the internet or telephones.
Yes. And this was a huge issue when I was writing this. He predated the environmental movement, nuclear weapons, et cetera. So, it's pure speculation. So I think that, and I explore this in the book, you bring together a team of historians that would debate and think about how that politician would conceptualize modern issues and where they would be. And so some of that is speculation. Some of that we can reasonably assess based on their sort of their general ideology and politics and viewpoints from the time.
So let's go to the next challenge you would face, which is how would you get an AI candidate on the ballot and run that campaign?
Okay, so that's a great question, and I really struggled with it in the book. So the issue is, our current laws require candidates to be citizens, and an AI is not a citizen because it's not a human, right? There's no birth certificate, there's no voter registration, things like that. In some far future, we might decide as a society that advanced AI has personhood and therefore could be a citizen, but that's very far future. The only workaround or way you could do this is that you would have an individual be a proxy. They would get on the ballot, they would change their name to be that candidate's name, or they would get on the ballot and they would promise to relinquish control upon election to this AI. And this is fraught with a number of problems, right? They could be sort of a Trojan horse saying they would give up power to the AI, but wouldn't. There's all these things that you could start to play out. But the primary thing is you need a volunteer, someone who would basically be the human sort of proxy for the AI and then relinquish control.
Got it. So, and then you run into some really interesting issues of, when you, in the United States, when you are a candidate, you swear an oath to the Constitution. And that is different than committing to following an AI. And there are lots of questions about foreign influence there. So it's definitely a test for sure. But I agree with you. That's how you'd have to do it, is sort of like an avatar, or this is I'm going to be the persona for this, and this is my model. In fact, we have candidates all the time who say, "Oh, I want to be a Reagan leader, or I want to be pick your poison of I'm going to be like this politician." So we kind of already do that. Now we just have the technology to do it. So candidate gets on the ballot. Let's say they get elected. What would voters, constituents, or special interests do to lobby an AI? Typically you would take the candidate out, you'd take them on tours, you'd provide information for them. with an AI, how do we get at that? They're not getting accosted by their neighbors at the supermarket, for example.
Right. So I think you would have to construct arguments that would appeal to its logic. And that's the only answer that I've got for you. I will say, because the novel that I wrote ends before the AI is elected. But
a sequel.
Yes, let's hope. But what I did learn in the process is an AI would actually be a super retail politician. So right now, a human politician can only talk to, they can go broadcast or they can go retail. And retail, for the listeners, obviously just talking one-on-one with a voter. Except that an AI candidate could be downloaded or interacted with a million times at once by all kinds of different voters. And that would allow it to basically scale retail politics in a way you could never do. So I think some of these questions are very interesting and very theoretical. But one thing I discovered is an AI could essentially outcompete in retail politics regular politicians, because they could basically chat with millions of voters at any given time. And that's a really interesting thing to think about, because it would completely change the way we do politics. And I would just say one last point is I do think that you're going to get essentially like online chatbot avatars for real candidates that would essentially allow voters to, and I'm using air quotes, talk to the candidate. So I could see an actual flesh and blood candidate using this technology as a way to sort of magnify their retail politics, if that makes any sense.
I agree with that. We're already starting to see some, this happens with chat support when you're dealing with companies and things like that. And I think as people become more familiar with that and comfortable with it, that will be something that we come to campaigns. But you've just given me a vision of sort of like this never-ending C-SPAN call-in show where the crazy voter has 24/7 access to their elected official, and hopefully the AI will weight that or discount that appropriately.
Well, that actually raises another fun issue that I discovered. So, it's funny. If you talk to people that were working at the dawn of the internet, they will tell you that one of the big things that built the internet was pornography. Mm-hmm. If you talk to people in AI today, look at how fast AI sort of chatbot girlfriend boyfriends are.
Right.
And this is a weird issue then for candidates who use these things is what percentage
just sexually
of
harassing all of your constituents all the time. Yeah.
Right. What percentage of the people using them will be addicted to some kind of are going to be sort of oddballs that are addicted to talking to chatbots? I mean, it's a weird future, but it is something that I think we'll experience.
You're listening to the Business of Politics show. I'm speaking with Robert Moran about the thought experiment he's conducted about what would it be like for an artificial intelligence to run for office. Now, Robert, where can people get your book, and tell us what it's called?
Well, the name of the book is Lincoln 2.0, and we're shopping it to publishers right now.
We've got to stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned is right. Stay tuned is right. And my big concern right now is that things are going so fast. I'm hoping that the book gets published before this actually happens in reality, because I'm just surprised. I wrote about this back in 2015, and then I started working on the book in 2018, and it's as though this thing is accelerated so fast. I'm a bit worried that some of the things I wrote about are going to start happening.
Right. You couldn't even. It's sort of like the truth is stranger than fiction. You wouldn't believe it if it had been written.
That's correct.
So, Robert, give us a sense of timeline and confidence interval for when we can expect AI candidates, whether that's sort of an assistant to the full-on, super AI.
Yep.
Copilot. You said it's moving quickly. What do you think is our horizon here?
So I'm going to give you and the listeners a number of different milestones I think we're going to likely to see. So I think you're going to see people run AI candidates for office in 2024, 2026, but they're going to be large language models and it's going to be a publicity stunt.
Okay.
Okay. And in fact, there are already historical chatbots that are pretty decent, like hellohistory.ai. You can chat with all kinds of different historical leaders. So I think you're going to get something like this where it's for publicity stunt. Then I think most of the presidential libraries are going to launch their own presidential AIs. At first, they're going to be large language models, and they're going to become very, very good because the presidential libraries have all the materials of those presidents. I expect that to happen in the next couple of years. And I've talked to at least one presidential library about this. The next thing that I think is going to happen, and this is a little bit longer term, is I think that people are going to start using these things as kind of like micro advisors. So imagine if you're a president and you have basically these AIs that are sort of replicas of past presidents. You can almost chat with them and ask them questions and sort of get ideas. I think that'll happen probably late 2020s. Now, there's been two, and then to answer your question, the final stage on this is artificial general intelligence, something called what we would call strong AI, where the machine is actually thinking for itself. And there have been two studies. They both put a likelihood of us achieving artificial general intelligence somewhere in the 2040s, 2050s. And then I think it's on. And then it's just, that's where all things start to get a little bit interesting. There's a theory that's called the spike that says that once you achieve this, things race ahead so fast because now this sort of super intelligent AIs can just start inventing things like, overnight.
Right.
And that things start to progress starts to accelerate. So I do think that we have some time here. And I wrote this as a way for us to explore this in advance so that I hope that enough Washington opinion elites and other folks will have read my book before we end up getting to this point. So they'll have thought through many of the problems that the characters face in the book.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I really admire about what you're doing is I'm a huge believer in speculative fiction or hard sci-fi as a thought experiment to start exploring some of these things. And a lot of people think it's aliens and spaceships, but no, it's a good way kind of prototype this future state. And what are the ethics, right? I mean, I think we've got really good ideas about what do you do if you encounter an extraterrestrial, through lots of writing. How do you deal with the ethics of time travel? So speculative fiction, like what you've done, is a really important tool and certainly widely used in the military planning context as well.
That's correct. So, there are futurists that just write, for example, for the Marine Corps.
Right. So we've talked about kind of the barriers to an AI candidate getting on the ballot. I want to come back a little bit closer to the present, which are what laws or regulations do you think need to be in place when it comes to AI in politics? We've already got elected officials in state houses putting in bans on the use of AI in campaign materials. Obviously, lots of questions and court challenges to come there. But what do you think the regulatory or legal framework ought to look like?
Wow, that's a very complex question. So economically, I tend to be a libertarian. So my default answer is none, because it would just slow it down and we don't know what we don't know. And that sounds probably fairly radical given where humans are at. But keep in mind that humans react to all new technologies in the same way. So we don't know about it. Then we learn about a technology and there's a brief bit of euphoria. Then there's panic about it and then then there's usually some kind of crisis. We put a lot of laws in place, usually backward looking, and then the public moves on with life. And then the technology continues to mature. And as it matures, it recedes to the background because it becomes embedded in our life. And then it's just a boring old technology. And I think you're going to see a little bit of that here. We have just a lot of fear mongering about this stuff. But a couple thoughts. The first is that I think we're going to have a crisis of in identity. And that's going to be driven by sort of malicious AI. And I think we're going to have to find a way to regulate it. And I don't know how you do that. And so what I mean by that is deep fakes.
So not an identity crisis, but a problem of identifying people.
Yes. So the software's now already good enough to create deep fakes of people, me and you, saying all sorts of absurd things. And just imagine
what
it will do.
You know, calling my bank, changing my address, and draining all of my. Yeah. Okay.
Right now, and already there are software packages that have been software that's been creating all sorts of fake LinkedIn accounts and being used for sort of international espionage and everything else. Imagine an AI that can create millions of fake LinkedIn accounts and then start interacting with you. It's entirely fake, right? The people don't even exist, but you don't know. And so I think we're going to have a challenge of just identity, which will be led by deep fakes. Like, is this digital thing that's happening actually real or not? And I do think that in the next couple of years, there'll be a stock market event driven by a deep fake of a CEO saying something or some report that's not true, but it will, impact the market.
Like an oil CEO saying we're divesting of all of our, wells or something like that.
Yes. Okay. And I think the SEC and NYSE and NASDAQ need to figure this out very quickly. I have some theories on it, but I think that is going to be a very big one. I think nation states are going to love using this for information war. And of course, a nation state has a monopoly on violence and is a law to itself, so it'll do what it wants. So anyway, I think there are some big questions here, and I do not even pretend to have the answers.
So, I'm really interested in some electoral reforms that might be able to help us get some of the benefits of an AI candidate. For example, what I always talk about is, ranked choice voting in the United States context in primary elections gives us more than a binary or 1 or 0, gives us a little bit more nuance about where do we want our party to go, for example. You read some of these science fiction stories. There's direct democracy, liquid democracy. What are some reforms that you think could get us part of the way towards the benefits of an AI candidate?
So I think I'm not sure about any reforms per se. And this is a fantastic question that someone should actually debate in a forum. What I assume is that we all start at the micro level getting used to using AI. The military has talked about using it at the squad level, down to the squad level in time, that we're going to have assistant bots that do this. At some point, we will all have digital agents that negotiate for us. And so I could see this vast network of artificial intelligence helping to educate voters in a new or different way or in a deeper way. I could also see a very different system where you would essentially delegate your AI to vote in sort of a direct democracy fashion,
right?
For you on a whole number of matters, or delegate to different other people's AIs. And you reference liquid democracy. So I think there's a lot of different formulations here, but I suspect that a lot of this comes from experimentation using sort of small scale AI that people are interacting with in a commercial context.
Right. That's something I hadn't thought about the sort of positive side of that of helping educate voters, because I think more informed voters are what we need. And so if AI can help inform voters, think of, the AI knows that you watched that 60 Minutes piece about dolphins, and then it reminds you when it's time to call your lawmaker because there's legislation for the dolphins coming up, and then it reminds you that they voted against that, and so it's time to vote in the primary. And just helping people stay informed in a more positive way, I think is one impact.
Agreed.
So what are some more near-term political use cases of AI that we haven't seen yet? Obviously, we've got people using large language models to help draft social media copy, to write emails. We've seen some people create images that they put in their ads. What's between here and HAL 9000 getting on the ballot?
Right. So I think you're right. I think you're going to see campaigns use AI to write and create ads. to write direct mail, which was always just a big human resource hog. I think I can imagine an LLM being trained to write much more effective fundraising appeals because you get the feedback on whether they gave or not, and you can kind of keep going. I suspect that there'll be that campaigns will experiment with AI avatars so that you could chat with their candidate one-to-one, sort of, in a sort of remote setting. And then here's where it gets a little bit more speculative. So there was a movie in the late 1940s, which as a pollster, I love this movie. It's called Magic Town. And in the movie Magic Town, a pollster, think like George Gallup back in the day, he finds
when you had to go door to door.
Yes, back then. That's right. That's what pollsters did in the old days. He finds this town that is perfectly representative of America in the late 40s. And it's like a gold mine. It's a secret weapon. All he has to do is talk to the people of this town, interview them in some kind of coordinated way. And now he knows exactly how America's going to react, right? And so it's this amazing cheat code. The problem is the town ultimately in the movie, the townspeople find out that they're Magic Town. And once that happens, it's the fishbowl effect. They know they're being watched. They behave differently, and it all blows up on them. Okay. Now, Magic Town, that was a movie in the 40s. Fast forward to the late 60s. In the late 60s, early 70s, the Nixon campaign found its own Magic Town, and that was called Montgomery County, Ohio. Montgomery County, Ohio, which includes Dayton, was a perfect microcosm of the United States in the late 60s. It had the right percentage of labor, white, African Americans, suburban, city, everything. So they studied Montgomery County very, very closely on how to win a campaign nationally, and it worked. Okay, fast forward to today. Wired just ran an article about how the UN hired an AI company called Culture Pulse to create a virtual simulation of all Israelis and Palestinians to try to figure out how you would defuse the conflict. So what they're going to do is create digital agents, millions of them, that would represent citizens, and then use that as sort of like almost like a Sim City to try to understand how you could defuse conflict. So imagine doing that, creating 10,000 digital agents. Imagine creating 130 million digital voting agents, and then testing, running campaigns over and over and over again to see which formulation wins for you in reality. Sports teams do something like this now. So I think you're going to see this in the not too distant future. In the world of market research, they're already talking about synthetic sample, how you could create essentially fake consumers that you could use as a sandbox for testing, soap ads, whatever. And so I do think that you're going to see this in the not too distant future. And so what you'll do is you'll run millions of simulations. If I make the candidate this way or that way, if he's,
or you test 100 different TV ads.
Right. Or a million different TV ads. Because once you get the computing power, 10, 20, 30, you could do 100. 200, 300, 300,000. It doesn't really matter. You just keep running the simulations looking for the optimal benefit.
Well, that's fascinating and have tremendous impact on a lot of the political industry. The one hang up, based on my years of experience interacting with voters, is they never do what you expect them to do. They're far from being rational. So it would be interesting to see how you factor that in with the sort of chaos factor within your synthetic samples.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm deeply skeptical. I think humans are just so unpredictable, especially at a tactical level, and they also learn very quickly, and they're social animals. So I just think that it's really hard to create any kind of modeling on them, but we'll see. I think we're going to find out very soon.
Well, my thanks to Robert Moran for a great conversation. I've got links to his article and to learn more about him in our show notes. If today's episode made you a little bit smarter, all we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague. I know I will be, because I learned some things here. And then when you share that, you look smart in the process. More people find out about the show. It's a win-win all around. We really appreciate it. Remember to subscribe to the Business of Politics show wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. You can also sign up for email updates on our website at businessofpoliticspodcast.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. The Business of Politics show is produced by Advocacy Content Kitchen, a media production studio.